bilateralism or multilateralism? The presidents of China and the U.S. offered starkly different visions to their APEC counterparts. How do the two approaches differ, and how are they likely to affect not just the region but the world? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. After their historic meetings in Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump arrived in Da Nang, Vietnam on Friday for the 25th APEC CEO Summit, the highlight of this year's APEC Economic Leaders Week, which is held under the theme of creating new dynamism, fostering a shared future. The two leaders accordingly delivered their highly anticipated keynote speeches at the summit. While President Trump reiterated that he will always put America first, saying that the U.S. has not been treated fairly by the World Trade Organization, President Xi vowed that China wouldn't stop the pace of opening up to the world and that globalization is an irreversible historical trend. For more on this topic, we have Dr. Victor Gao, Global Counselor at the Asia Society, Harvey Zoding, a Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and we're also joined on the line by Dr. Ralph Winnie, Director for the China Program at the Eurasian Business Coalition. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Dr. Gao, I'm sure you have listened to these speeches with attention. What do you think is the biggest difference that struck you the most?
I think President Donald Trump of the United States was talking about America first, which could be very irritating to all the other business partners from the rest of the world, whereas President Xi Jinping of China is talking about the common destiny of mankind, win-win strategy, and people and different countries working together, and greater push for globalization and free trade. And I think these two presidents really talked about two very different approaches about economic and trade relations in the world today. And I think all the APEC member states have had the chance to listen, and I'm sure they will choose path for leading for greater globalization, more free trade, rather than the path leading to more protectionism and more barriers and more shrinkage of trade in the world. So the choice will be clear.
Indeed, the reaction of the participants at the summit was quite interestingly different. Harvey, what is your take? Just now, Dr. Gao says the sentence of putting America first. However, President Trump also said every nation should put their interests first. It also makes a little bit of sense, don't you think?
It does make sense. Every country has to follow its national interest, but it doesn't mean that national interest doesn't include regional and global interests. Oftentimes, regional and global cooperation furthers the national interest, and President Trump, in his simplistic view of the world, doesn't see that for some reason. So I was profoundly disappointed by his talk, especially after the wonderful visit that the two leaders, President Xi and President Trump, had the last few days in Beijing. This is a real letdown. From what I saw today in Da Nang, we have one leader who's building bridges and another one who's building walls.
And let me get the view from Dr. Winnie for his take on the differences of the two speeches. Dr. Winnie, what is your take?
Well, I think we know that Trump is taking this America First approach. It's not surprising, given that he's talked about the forgotten man and woman in America that feel left behind by globalization. So Trump is going to promote this America First agenda, but at the same time look for concrete results. Very simply, after the meeting with President Xi, President Trump and Xi announced a major deal where China Energy Corporation is going to invest $83 billion in shale gas development and chemical manufacturing projects in the state of West Virginia over 2 decades to revitalize their economy. This, I think, is very, very historic. And if I was Trump, I would continue to promote an agenda that keeps everything on the table, but at the same time ensure the American people that I've got you first, very similar to what China has done for many, many years, as Trump has clearly articulated. Certainly, President Xi understands that the key to continued growth and prosperity for China is to engage in the Silk Road Initiative and create more partnerships with their neighbors, for the simple reason that China has come under criticism for their actions in the South China Sea. Whether that's logical or illogical is irrelevant, but China recognizes that this soft form of diplomacy through economic trade and engagement is going to win them allies in the near future. Trump believes that he's got to bring jobs and economic prosperity back to the forgotten man and woman in America that have been left behind.
Yeah, well, I think one of the differences that the use of words is that President Trump talked about America, 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 whereas President Xi mentioned the word we a lot more compared with President Trump. He also he also listed many concrete ideas and concrete measures about how China sees, you know, you can approach this common prosperity as a goal. Dr. Gao, how do you see China's approach to regional development vis-a-vis President Trump's vision?
I think President Xi Jinping's important speech mentioned many things to the APEC member states, and these points were fully addressed by him at his very important 19th Party Congress speech, which lasted for more than 3 hours and 20 minutes. So for us, domestic audience, we know what he had in his mind. But for the rest of the world, I think it's important to emphasize that China today sees itself as a very important country, but very much part of the world. And the world is becoming more and more interconnected. The world is shrinking because of much more acceleration in terms of technologies, for example, and of new ways of building things, moving things, shipping things around, etc. So the globalization is an inevitable trend. Every country needs to join this great megatrend, and no country can work for its own benefit if it wants to get out of this megatrend, including the United States. So I think President Xi Jinping is definitely right on the head of all these issues, talking about globalization, talking about more liberalization, inclusive development, innovation driving more development, and win-win situation. This is not only China believes in, this is also what China wants to talk about and practice going forward in the coming years and coming decades. Whereas President Donald Trump may be right in a very narrowly defined way, talking about America first. But America first cannot be achieved if America wants to put the rest of the world second. America first cannot be achieved if, for example, President Donald Trump really wants to achieve the goal that all the other countries becomes last and least, because this will really eventually result in a backlash. People want to walk away from the so-called American leadership in the world, and people want to have a new future where everyone can become first, all countries can become first, and everyone need to join hands in working for a brighter tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I think the reason why President Trump mentioned this America First repeatedly is because he profoundly believes, I think, that in the past decades the U.S. has been taken advantage of, and now it's time to rectify that. And he particularly pointed finger at the World Trade Organization, saying, you know, the rules, the same rules have not been respected by everybody. Before we go on to talk about this, let's take a closer look at what he said.
We have not been treated fairly by the World Trade Organization. Organizations like the WTO can only function properly when all members follow the rules and respect the sovereign rights of every member.
Harvey, what is your reaction to what he said here? Do you have the impression that he victimized the U.S. economy, or does he paint a fair picture?
Well, he paints the Americans as victims, but it's a system created by Americans, so it's kind of ironic. And another irony is today, the exact same day that President Trump was complaining about the WTO ruled in favor of America and New Zealand and against Indonesia in a trade case involving meat and poultry products. At the same time, almost the same time, the U.S. Department of Commerce imposed a very high tariff on Indonesian palm oil under the proposition that the Indonesians are engaging in unfair trade. I think it's this kind of balkanization that led the world into many problems in the 20th century and before, and where President Trump may be pointing us again.
Dr. Weenie, what is your take on this? What do you think President Trump is really against, or is the World Trade Organization being scapegoated here?
I think what we're missing is when President Trump says America First policy, it doesn't mean that we're going to screw the rest of the world. What he's focused on is free and fair trade. Now, he doesn't believe that being involved in multinational organizations is going to achieve free and fair trade between the U.S. and other countries. So that's why he's promoting bilateral relations as a method of making sure that America's interests are protected and there's free and fair trade between the U.S. and the other countries that the United States will be engaged with.
But I think the question for President Trump is not bilateral trade and multilateral trade, but the choice between bilateral trade or multilateral trade. Do you think for the countries...
He's deciding bilateral trade.
Yeah, and do you think for the countries...
He's deciding that bilateral trade is the best way to go.
Yeah, but do you think for the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, that is something that they would very much like to have?
I think if you can show concrete results that they're going to benefit from that kind of approach, then it's a win-win situation. If both sides achieve their goal of economic peace and prosperity for their respective citizens, yes, I think that would be a way to go.
Well, on the other hand...
that's going to remains to be seen.
Sure. On the other hand, is it realistic to have just bilateral trade agreements while we have so many countries and, you know, this complex web of international trade relations? Is it possible to go back and have these bilateral relations between each and every one of them?
Yeah, I think Trump, he's not a politician, he's not a diplomat, he's a businessman, he's a deal maker. So he's going to try and get the best deal possible that will achieve the desired results, i.e. jobs and economic development, prosperity in the United States, at the same time benefit these other countries. And as long as you produce concrete desired results where people's economic livelihood is improving, that becomes the bottom line. If I was advising him, I would say keep all options on the table and go with the best one that you think is going to work, under the idea of America first, but also recognizing that in order for that to really be successful in the long run, the other country or countries that you're engaged with are going to have to see concrete results on their side. And if you have free and fair trade in Donald Trump's mind, that's what's going to happen. You know, he's very deeply concerned.
Yeah, at this moment, I think multilateral trade pacts is not on the table. But we're going to talk about this issue when we come back.
Right.
And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, and we continue our discussion on the two speeches by the two presidents. Another thing that I noticed about President Trump's speech, and very notably, is the paragraphs after paragraphs of him finger-pointing without naming names, mostly about the role the state is playing in some economies. He was talking about industrial planning, he was talking about state-owned enterprises, he was talking about state subsidies, you know, the regulations so-called forcing the setting up of joint ventures for foreign investors. Are these accusations well-founded, Dr. Gao?
You know, first of all, I think at a very important international forum like the APEC meeting, crying foul doesn't help, and crying foul foul itself will not help create millions of jobs back in the United States. Crying foul will only alienate your relation with all the other delegates sitting in the audience, and it's not very constructive. I think, first of all, I do not agree with the way President Donald Trump characterized all these problems. Secondly, as the leader of the United States, the largest economy and the most important country militarily as well as economically today, to fail to come up with constructive proposals, to fail to exercise your global leadership of providing solutions to the problems, and only crying foul like a crying baby is really very disappointing.
What is, however, the solutions to the problems that President Trump highlighted? The loss of jobs, you know, talking about industries or factories being stripped from the United States. These are some real problems that the Americans are faced with.
Well, I think the Americans created, along with others, this post-World War II order that includes things like Bretton Woods, includes things like GATT and now WTO. And so if those institutions are not working, they shouldn't be thrown out. We shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We should improve them. Just making generalizations without any proof, something that President Trump does too often, is not the way to go. And after all, this is an economic cooperation forum. It's not a place where you're supposed to bitch about things. It's a place where you're supposed to cooperate and solve problems. So I think that's the way to go.
I've just been told that leaders attending the APEC leaders meeting are gathering for a group photo opportunity. So we're going to switch to those live signals as soon as they become available. But still, I think it's very interesting. Yes, Dr. Gao.
Yeah, yes, if you allow me to use one example, right now the United States under the leadership of President Donald Trump is squabbling with countries like Mexico or even Japan and South Korea about car manufacturing. And President Donald Trump apparently had an idea of moving some of the car manufacturing capacities from outside of the United States back to the United States, or refusing to allow more American automakers to ship some of their manufacturing capacities or new capacities to foreign countries. This, I think, is very narrowly minded, mainly because I think the U.S. could have done better. They could have actually focused their technological know-how and tried to make a major breakthrough on the next generation of cars.
Indeed, the solutions lie somewhere else instead of crying for existing trade rules, which literally apply to everybody. Now let's go live to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Economic Leaders Meeting, where leaders from the region are gathering for a group photo opportunity. It's been a busy day, and we are seeing leaders from the United States, from China, from Russia, if I'm right. I see President Putin there, and of course other regional leaders all attending this very important meeting. I think it's, as President Xi mentioned, we are seeing a profound change, right, especially when the economic development has yet to pick up real speed. So what needs to be done? He proposed, for instance, finding self-generating drivers for the economy, or innovation-led economy. What about these factors? Maybe President Trump can think about those instead of finding, you know, manufacturing jobs back to the United States, or, you know, revitalizing the coal-fired sector.
I think he should be working on things that we can do together that are synergistic. For example, President Xi proposed the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. It's a very wonderful initiative that's borne fruit already. I don't know how we could have foreseen the changes in the world, but President Xi and his advisors saw those changes, and so the Belt and Road is building connectivity, building cooperation, building win-win. And I think Americans would like to get involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, but the American companies don't know how. By the same token, there's a lot of opportunity if President Trump carries through on his promise, his campaign promise, to have $1 trillion infrastructure project to fix the broken infrastructure in America. There's a lot of room for Chinese companies there, for instance, the high-speed trains and so on.
Indeed, and President Xi again touched about this subject about connectivity and connected development and building an open Asia-Pacific economy that benefits all. And what's interesting is this paragraph really drew a lot of some of the warmest applauses. And let's take a listen to what President Xi said there.
We should put in place a regional cooperation framework that ensures consultation from equals, wide participation and shared benefits. We should build an open Asia-Pacific economy and promote trade investment to liberalization and facilitation.
Let me go to Dr. Weenie joining us from Washington, D.C. What do you think of this message that President Xi is highlighting about interconnectivity?
Well, I've always been a big proponent of the Silk Road Initiative. I do think it's a very strong, positive form of diplomacy coming out of China, and I do think that that would be a win-win situation for both China and the United States in terms of promoting economic prosperity and job creation. As far as infrastructure development, that has been Trump's one of his major priorities. A lot is going to determine what can get passed through the U.S. Congress. So I think understanding what is needed in the global community will be very, very important, certainly moving forward. At the same time, Trump is going to have to deliver to what I call the forgotten man and woman in America in order to ensure that he is reelected, you know, in 2020. So when he comes out with his rhetoric of America first, he wants to send a message that the United States is not going to get taken advantage of in the near future, so that everybody is on the same page. Now we've got to see moving forward what can he actually accomplish in terms of trade deals.
Yeah, well, I don't think the two are contradicting each other. Dr. Gao, your take?
Yeah, I think, allow me to make one brief point. President Donald Trump seemed to call countries which run a trade surplus with the United States as if those countries are raping the United States, and he called China raping the United States on many, many occasions. This is really very disappointing. For example, in China, we do have big trade surplus with the United States, but China also has big trade deficit with countries like Australia. Should China call Australia raping China? No, I think that would be the worst thing that China can ever do. I think in any bilateral trade, you may have some surplus, you may have some deficit. This is normal. And for those countries to have trade deficit, philosophically speaking, it's wrong to call the other country raping this country. Of course, we need to do everything we can to make the trade more balanced, but it takes two to tango. The United States should be encouraged to come up with more goods to sell to China, and I'm sure the Chinese leaders, including President Xi Jinping, want to make sure that the Chinese purchasing power stays and we will be able to buy more goods from the United States.
I think we have to take President Xi's words with a grain of salt, or not really take it literally, because he has used so many vivid languages that it's really difficult not to be swayed by it. You have to look at the essence. I think what he really meant is that these trade deficits are very, very bad. I'm not trying to defend him. I do not agree with that, but I think he has been trying to send that very strong message. However, another thing I noticed is that he also talked about helping to provide high-quality infrastructure for the Asia-Pacific region during the speech today. Is he seeing the need of doing that in this part of the world after seeing what China is proposing, Harvey?
Well, I think it's a great example. If you compare American train system to the train systems that China is building both domestically and around the world, it's night and day. And so I think that something right is being done here. So the Belt and Road Initiative is spreading connectivity. Connectivity is needed to do trade. The shortcoming of Belt and Road, at least in the short run, is that the trade may be more one way from China out. But I think that in in time that that will be rectified and it will be a full two-way trade. And so I think that APEC and also ASEAN are working very hard to try to build a system where the countries that are members can cooperate. And so that's why the regional comprehensive economic partnership will be concluded in a year or two, and that includes all the ASEAN countries. And then after that, the plan is to have another more comprehensive plan that includes all the members of APEC as well.
Dr. Winnie, what is your take on this? Some people are saying there are already too many regional trade arrangements in this part of the world. We have the TPP, we have the RCEP, we have the APEC, we have also the Belt and Road Initiative, which is regarded by some people as some kind of a trade arrangement. People are talking about the risk of a spaghetti effect. What is your take?
Well, that is correct. There could be a spaghetti effect. What it comes down to is, are the countries benefiting or not benefiting from being part of these multinational trade arrangements? If you can show concrete results where people's economic livelihood is improved, then there's going to be support for being involved in all of these different multinational organizations. So Trump has taken the position that only bilateral trade is going to be beneficial, not multinational.
Yeah, thank you very much.
She believes the opposite, and I think part of Xi's strategy with the Silk Road is to create China's new economic stimulus program, and at the same time create a lot of goodwill among different countries that may have been lost because of the criticism China has received about their involvement in the South China Sea. So I think that's certainly a really good strategy for China.
Dr. Winnie, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. We're running out of time. Many thanks to all our guests, Harvey Zoding, Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, Victor Gao, Global Counselor at the Asia Society, and Dr. Ralph Winnie, Director of the China Program at the Eurasian Business Coalition. My last point, the different styles and visions of the two leaders have never been more prominent. As President Trump talked about a far-away Indo-Pacific dream, China offered concrete solutions and opportunities on how to arrive at common prosperity. President Trump pointed fingers at so-called unfair trade practices. President Xi offered approaches on how to benefit more people with trade and investment. President Trump wants bilateralism, while President Xi upholds multilateralism and open regionalism. The list goes on. It's foreseeable that the two visions will likely compete for influence within the region in the near future. Dialogue and cooperation between China and the U.S. will be crucial in helping keep the region a truly growing and Pacific one. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Lu Xin. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week at the same time.